So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Kaguya. So let's start the series. How dare you do this to me? A voice thundered across the ruined clearing, frigid and icy. The woman's voice said, I am your mother, I am a god! But it wasn't just any woman. Around the world, her name is both feared and revered. It turned out to be none other than Kaguya Otsutsuki. She was a good distance away from the two individuals standing side by side, on the far side of the clearing. One responded in a low, solemn voice, Mother! With the second figure looking at her with intense interest across from him, he went on. I am sorry that it has come to this. Your power has brought you nothing but arrogance and corruption. He turned to face the person by his side, who gave him a small nod. Begin the ritual, Hamura. The figure paused, balancing his emotions against the outside world. It appeared that his heart weighed too little. Of course, Hagoromo. After that, both of them raced across the field at superhuman speeds, with Hamura undergoing hand seals at a pace that is beyond the comprehension of most people. As Hamura walked up to Kaguya, he said, Sealing technique, displacement of the primordial god. Not to be outdone, though, she vanished from her second son before reappearing in front of her first, Hagoromo. Both Shinra Tensha shouted at the same time. However, Kaguya, being the source of all core energy, he was not going to be surpassed. Her method was far more powerful than that of her first child. A tremendous force threw him back, and he slid down the ground for a few meters before he straightened himself. He was almost immediately joined by Hamura. Kaguya's tone was remarkably calm as she stated, It is of no use. They could see her face well when she looked up. It was as bright and lovely as they would ever recall. Two bangs framed the side of her face and extend just below her ribcage, while long, silky white hair reaches the ground and runs down her back. First, despite a few peculiarities, there were prominent bulges in each of her pure white eyes that extended past her temple and ended almost halfway to her hairline. There are two distinct red markings over each eye, and there is a clear vertical split between them. The most peculiar of them may be the two horn-like projections that, oddly enough, resemble rabbits and are located just above her hairline. Hagoromo said, I have inherited the eyes you so cherish, mother. Whether you have more power or not, we shall defeat you, for me and my brother fight for a higher purpose than you, he said with certainty. We fight for those who cannot do so for themselves, the ones you have subjugated to your will. They fear you. You are no god. At his remark, Kaguya's fragile face contorted in anger. You fool! She yelled while maintaining her air of respect. You have been trying to defeat me for years now, running just like a dog after every defeat. To fight for a higher purpose than you may think. It might not be in yours, your brother's, or even the world's best interests. But it is in his. Hagoromo's eyebrows went up one. What could she possibly mean? He asked himself. Hagoromo is a man with pale skin and shoulder-length, light red hair that is spiky. He had a short beard as well. The protrusions on his forehead are inherited from his mother. He lacked eyebrows and had Rinnegan eyes. In addition, he possessed a circle symbolizing Yang in his right palm, a dark half-moon symbolizing Yin on his left, and a red Rinnegan in the center of his forehead. Brother. He turned to face Hamura. He inquired, What does she mean by that? Like his brother, Hamura shared his mother's pale complexion and colorless white eyes. Like his brother, he also had two protuberances on his forehead, and on his left palm was a half-moon, which stands for Yin. The straightforward response he received was, I do not know. Hamura was aware of pain when Kaguya abruptly vanished from their shared view. His mother was standing over his gaunt figure, her fist buried in his stomach. He was hurled several meters back, creating a deep trench in the ground, and the laws of physics and momentum eventually caught up with him. A metallic, grinding sound echoed around the clearing as Hagoromo aimed a fist at his mother. His hand suddenly resembled a cannon, with the barrel rotating slowly and menacingly. The cannon's center briefly glowed blue before a beam of pure core energy burst from it and raced in Kaguya's direction, vaporizing everything in its path. The blast would just go through the goddess. He widened his eyes in surprise. And Kaguya had enough time to take advantage of the situation. She suddenly materialized in front of him, slashing for his throat with a shimmering white sword fashioned from her own bones. However, he narrowly avoided it in time because of his keen vision. Kaguya opened the red Rinnegan eye on her forehead, which had 9 tomo ringing the pupil on 4 concentric rings, and said in a flat voice, "I tire of these games." Hagoromo cursed to himself. "Shit! Whatever happened to you, mother?" he said, hoping to elicit a respectable response from her or at least by some time. "If I don't end this quickly, she will start drawing on the Shinji's core energy." He could see his brother going through a lengthy, intricate series of seals in the distance. He would have smirked if she hadn't lost their chance by choosing not to deploy her Byakugan while she had her Rinnegan active. "You were never like this. You were capable of love, not just for us, but for all existence. What made you this way?" he demanded. He tried to ignore the horrible feeling that rose in his stomach as she glared at him, screaming murder and anger, while he waited for his mother to respond. He raised an eyebrow in response to her statement. "You have no idea what it is like to be hated for doing what is right, to such an extent that your own offspring turn against you, the rage and misery that accompany that life cannot be explained in mere words." "That is not what is right, mother," growled Hagoromo. "You are forcing people into a life of servitude and fear. How can you expect anyone to accept that as a way of life? It is not what is right." "Tell me," she replied. "What is good and evil? Can you feel it? Smell it? Or even see it? If you cannot prove that something exists, then it does not," she said, her eyes burning with anger and disappointment. "Why can you not see that what I am doing is not evil, it is simply what must be done? But I do not expect you to understand, not anymore, but he will." Before Hagoromo could react, she was running at an amazing speed, her core energy surged, and several bones augmented by core energy were hurtling in his direction. He was able to avoid most of the missiles by using his eyes to limit his perception as much as possible, but one hit him and went deep into his side, barely missing his left lung. She narrowed her eyes and muttered, "It's over," as she walked toward him holding a bone sword. She swung down, and he barely avoided the blow. "Why prolong this? Why add unnecessary suffering to it? Just remain motionless, let me to obliterate your existence, forget this world, and go on to the next. What would you do even if you managed to beat me? Bring harmony to your ideological convictions? I don't think so. Having power over everyone else is what brings about peace, not love or acceptance. Making people perceive things as they ought to." He said, "You are wrong, mother. Peace is brought about through understanding the people around you. Even if your enemy stands across from you, know what their heart desires and you shall understand their actions." She looked at him blankly, unreadable. "And yet here you stand, in front of your own mother no less, spouting off your hypocritical nonsense. How can you say such things while doing the exact opposite of what you are preaching?" He slowly stood up and responded, "I have looked into your heart, and all I see you wishing complete dominance and loyalty, whether it is forced or not." "Enough," she said. She hesitated as he grinned and said, "Join your brother in the afterlife." She turned and was shocked to discover Hamura standing just behind her, finishing the final seal in the sequence. He exclaimed, "Fuin spirit art, suicide of the god in space and time!" And at that moment, Kanji sprang forth from his body, entangling him and Kaguya in a cocoon of intricate symbols and seals. Hagoromo was struck with sorrow and heartache after witnessing the precise which tactic his brother used to defeat his mother. "Brother!" exclaimed Hamuro. They only needed to look into each other's eyes for a brief while to show how much they loved and cared about one another. You know I cannot complete this technique without outside help. Hurry! Hagoromo said. It was decided that the first person to receive a chance would employ this approach, which was created specifically for this purpose. Despite this, he couldn't help but wish he were his brother right now. He began walking through the chain of seals after turning to face his mother. You were too arrogant and self-assured, mother. You assumed Homura was dead and didn't even bother to use the core energy you absorbed from the Shinji. This arrogance has led to your downfall. Both heard her whisper. You may not call me that any longer. They were shocked that she wasn't screaming bloody murder and kicking. Both of them suddenly sensed the Shinji's tyrannical and malevolent core energy. Homura began to scream in agony due to the core energy's corrosive qualities. Shit! He cursed, causing the seals to accelerate to an unbelievable speed. He yelled, Fuin! As Kaguya completed her final move. As the lone item in her own pocket universe was sent thousands of years into the future, she said to herself. Nishu, bridge of space and time. Her final words before closing her eyes and exhaling were, Go now, my son! After sealing his mother's body with the Chibaku Tensei and creating the moon, Hagoromo gazed sorrowfully at his brother's corpse, which he would bury. After enclosing himself in the Shinji's core energy, he would divide this basic energy into 9 distinct pieces on his deathbed. He would never understand that he had only absorbed half of the Shinji's core energy. Additionally, he would have witnessed the Rinnegan turn white and the core energy coils behind her Byakugan eyes vanish into nothing, leaving only emerald green eyes, had he given his mother's corpse more attention. After about 2,000 years. In his younger years, he was frequently referred to as the Professor, the third headmaster. Was quite perplexed. On the ceremonial throne, he thought to himself, I thought Kushina was only expecting 1 child, or 2 babies. One was a man, the other a woman. He thought aloud to himself that they both exuded an oppressive mood. Obviously an after effect of the 9 beasts being sealed. Minato must have divided the 9 beasts into 2 parts. But why do the boys feel different? Worse? The female had short bright red hair, bright blue eyes, and a huge set of lungs, if the wailing was any indication. If he recalled correctly, they were to call her Mito. He wasn't sure of the boy, though, the boy with the emerald eyes, the bright, sharp hair, and a sporadic black streak. The wind whispered to him. It said, Nurda. The Sandaime headmaster of Hyde Ninja Village was the 3rd headmaster. There was always the possibility that another village would take advantage of the situation to plant spies or even launch a full-scale attack on Hyde Ninja Village. The Tsuchi master has always been the opportunistic type, he thought to himself. This man, who had short graying hair, a wrinkled face, and brown liver spots on his face, was sitting in his office reminiscing about the previous 5 years following the defeat of the 9 beasts. He had taken the 2 infants to his office in the headmaster building as soon as the sealing took place. Following the sealing, all of the shinobi who were in the group were summoned straight to his office and pledged to secrecy, with the threat of death, promising not to reveal the children's true identities to anybody. However, since this is a ninja village, the secret didn't last long. 5 days after the sealing, rumors about the sealing and the 2 infants used as the vessel started to circulate. The headmaster promptly had all of the shinobi present questioned by Ibiki, the head of the INT department, whom he had entrusted with the extremely sensitive information. Since the leak wasn't among them, he concluded that an outside source had witnessed the sealing and was leaking the information, though he didn't know why, which was even more concerning. But that was not the headmaster's concern. 2 hours after the sealing, the female, Mito as she had been named, calmed down. To those who were unaware, she was just a typical child, but the boy was a different story. He had one of the knowledgeable Hyugas examine his core energy, and what they discovered was alarming. The boy's coils were already developed to what a 6-year-old should be. With all the medical knowledge they possessed, they knew that should not be possible. Despite being more active than a typical newborn, the girls stayed normal as a Jinchuriki could be, he supposed, and were not larger than they should have been. He whispered to himself, "The seal can't be defective. Mito would be giving of the same feeling he does." He reasoned that it wasn't core energy, as the Hyuga confirmed, and that instinct was the best way to describe it. You could not help but listen to the voice in the back of your head that said, "This child is dangerous." However, he was not a shinobi for nothing, and he was able to ignore this voice most of the time. Then came the voice he had heard that night, carried on the wind and only a whisper, and he sometimes told himself that it was only the stress and exhaustion of the night that had caused him to hear it, but he knew deep down that it wasn't, and he had named the child Naruto as the voice had instructed. In addition to having snow-white hair with 2 midnight black streaks thrown in, he also had the deepest emerald green eyes that held an intelligence the headmaster knew should not be there, at least not in one so young. He frequently found himself wondering about this child, who was more of an enigma than anything else. His sister Mito had the brightest red hair and deep, shining blue eyes, with 3 whisker-like marks on each cheek. She was also slightly short for her age but otherwise healthy. "How should I handle those two?" he spoke aloud. Orphanage, 12:30 p.m. He was sitting on his bed, going through the very few books he had, all the old and unwanted ones the orphanage had given him, and he thought, just another wasted day. He knew that he and his sister were treated differently than anyone else, and that his sister was sitting across the room from him, completely unaware of everything that was going on around her. "Not that there is anything happening," he snorted to himself. She turned to face him when the disturbance caught her attention and asked, "Onii-san, what did you say?" His own speech patterns were completely different from hers. He spoke only when necessary, in brief, clipped tones that belied his intelligence for someone so young, while Mito would run her mouth 100 miles per second when prompted to make her point. Her brother was one of the few people who paid much attention to her, so she cherished the few occasions when they had a conversation that lasted longer than a few minutes. Naturally, this has never stopped Mito from speaking when she felt the need to. "Just thinking." "Oh," was the response he gave her. "Onii-san?" "Yes." She nudged. "Mito? Don't you ever feel like people can be mean to us?" was her reply. "The way they stare at you and me makes me wonder if there's something wrong with us." He cocked an eyebrow, thinking that maybe she wasn't as naive as he had assumed. Seeing her eager countenance, he decided to respond in a humorous way, asking, "What brought this on Mito?" "I don't know, it's just the way people look at me." She bowed her head and muttered, "Sometimes I think I did something wrong." "You have never said anything in the past." They were also kept apart from the other kids. When they went out to play, they were told to stay in their room, and when they were finished, they were led outside and left there with only the other. Mito seemed to thrive on the games that the kids played, so when he felt like it, he made it a point to play them as best he could, if more for her sake than anything else. They were also forced to eat in their room, and as Naruto frequently observed, the food was never exactly fresh, the bread that appeared to be a few days old, and the overripe fruits never sat well with him. He frequently wondered why they were treated differently. With a sigh, he continued, "You did nothing wrong, Mito." She looked into his eyes, tears welling up at the corners of her own. "So why? Why do they treat us like monsters?" she yelled. "Why won't they allow us to play with the other children who reside here?" Her voice began strongly but gradually weakened as she asked, "Why can't somebody just tell me they love me?" Her anguish was evident. His straightforward response was, "I do not know, Mito." His resolve was broken when he saw the anguish and sorrow in her eyes as she turned her head away. Mito began forcing her to turn and meet his gaze. "I love you," he murmured after he hesitated for a bit. She stared at her brother, and her eyes grew big. Then, While crying and holding to him for dear life, she threw herself across the room and gave him the tightest hug she could. She fell asleep in his arms after 5 minutes. She smiled slightly, and he muttered to her sleeping body, "I do not know why they treat us like this, but I intend to find out." 10:30 a.m. the following day. Mito and Naruto were seated in their room. They were alone in the room because all the kids and caregivers had departed. They had previously skipped lunch and were both really hungry. The worst thing was that they were unable to even go for the apple and piece of bread that typically occupied their lunch plates, since the caretakers had locked the door before they departed. While he was thinking about their predicament, and what may possibly justify the treatment they experienced, he had persuaded her to try reading a book to pass the time. He was searching his mind for any facts or hints about them. He sensed that something was near him. But like water running through outstretched fingers, it seemed to just vanish again each time he reached out. Of course, in a figurative sense, I wish there was a way to stop those fingers. Then an idea struck him. He recalled reading about meditation. He recalled the text. A way to focus and clear one's mind, as well as everything else. He quickly got out of bed, sat with his knees crossed, and then, somewhat bewildered, he placed his hands in the tiger seal. He tried to control his breathing and directed all of his attention inward. He initially made every effort to concentrate on his thoughts, but something pulled them away from that goal. What did it feel like? Fire? No, he wouldn't describe it with that adjective. It felt more like a tightly wound, compacted ball in his gut that was shifting and attempting to escape its constraints. He gave the task of unwinding this ball his whole attention, even if it was first somewhat challenging. He tried a different strategy since it didn't seem to want to cooperate with him. He relaxed and let the ball do as it pleased because it appeared to have a life of its own. The ball began to go over his body in all directions, and it turned out to be simpler than previously. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely free and content, and it felt fantastic. However, there was another ball that was larger, different, and more firmly compacted. With this one, he followed suit and let it to flow freely through his body. He couldn't explain it, but it was the most incredible sensation he had ever experienced. It was like, as darkness took hold of him, a feminine voice that sounded like power resonated through his mind. With Mito. "Oniai-san, what are you doing?" she asked as she finished the book and noticed her brother on the floor with his hands in a strange position. He looked like he had been there for a while. When she received no answer, she started to approach him, only to pause mid-stride as a silver energy exploded from his body and started blowing the covers of their beds and his books of the shelf. She stared in fascination until the floor beneath her brother cracked and splintered. As she was forced to her knees, her adrenaline spiked, and she called out in a frantic voice, "Oniai-san! What are you doing?" she shouted. He didn't seem to hear her. "Oniai-san! Stop, please! I'm afraid of you! Oniai-san!" Still no response. "Quit!" She tried to scream as loudly as she could, but it didn't seem to get through to him. She was on the floor screaming in agony when the headmaster arrived, but before he entered the building, he noticed that her screams carried an undertone of worry. That was as far as his train of thought went before the side of the building exploded. She watched as his face set into a smile and malevolent black energy burst forth from his body, a strand coming towards her as she put her arm up to try to stop it. Before she could process this new development, a loud cracking sound echoed through the room. In the medical facility. "Step away!" the Sandaime shouted at the top of his lungs, rushing through the hospital. Mito was being carried by the tiger masked Anbu, and he himself held Naruto, whose body was shaking and was running a fever. Approaching the first doctor he laid eyes on, he began speaking. "Hey there! Take the girl and boy and get them well immediately," he yelled. The doctor, who was looking at the two, sneered and wrinkled his nose, but he followed the headmaster's instructions because the thought of what had happened to the last doctor who had refused to treat the two made his blood run cold. When the Sandaime muttered, "Tiger," an ANBU instantly knelt down in front of him and added, "If he tries anything, stay in the chamber where they are supposed to be cured," he said. "Take him to Ibiki." "Hi, Headmaster Sama," was the response, and he disappeared. The headmaster entered the room 10 minutes later, but not before he had to go assess the damage to the orphanage. "Thank Kami, no one was there today," he said. "Where, sir?" "The orphanage," he replied, "is severely damaged. They took the kids on a field trip to one of the parks." The ANBU with the tiger mask inquired inquisitively. The headmaster added, "They are very lucky." The ANBU simply nodded in agreement. "Although they better have a damn good explanation to the reason these two weren't with them," he said in a chilly tone. The ANBU prudently declined to answer. "Gosh! It's not good, Headmaster Sama. All of my methods appear to be blocked by something. I've even tried using needles as a substitute, but they just break. It feels like I'm hitting a brick wall as soon as the needle pierces the flesh. I have no idea what to do." The man spoke out of fear of the headmaster's fury. "How is that possible?" he asked, narrowing his gaze at the man. "And no! Of course not, Headmaster Sama," was the man's best response as he began to tremble in terror. "If you are trying to pull something, so help me," he demanded. "Who is the head doctor in the hospital?" the headmaster said, closing his eyes slowly and letting out a deep sigh. The guy stepped back uneasily and murmured in a low voice, "That would be me, Headmaster Sama." The vision of Naruto. He was conscious, but his senses were dead, and he felt as though he was floating in a chasm of blackness. Without sight, smell, or feeling, he realized he was in a clearing as his senses began to return. He was high in the air, watching 3 figures fight for supremacy. There were 2 men and 1 woman, but he was too high to notice anything beyond the woman's snow-white hair and the pristine white sword in her hand. There was no pain as he had thought there would be, but energy seemed to gather around her before launching itself like a bullet in his direction. Just a feeling of comprehension and, oddly, affection. "Look, Naruto, look at how they betrayed me. After all I did for them, can you see the resentment they hold?" A distinctly female voice whispered in his ear after this feeling subsided. "Yes." He could hardly speak as the voice repeated, "I have given everything I have to you. You shall be the one to take my place. I have faith that you will do what needs to be done. Will you accept this task from me?" He had no idea what was going on, but this voice seemed familiar, as if he had heard it before. He trusted it, but he wasn't sure how or why. "What is this task you speak of?" he asked after a brief pause. There was no response for a few seconds, but after what seemed like an eternity it said, "I cannot tell that to you now, but it is for the greater good of all. Do you accept?" He hesitated a little, but something inside of him was screaming, and he could not ignore it. "I do." "Excellent. As of today you have unlocked the first ability bound to you by my blood. Use it well, as there is still much to come." "Wait. Bound by blood? What do you mean? What ability do you speak of?" There was a brief moment of quiet. "The bones of a warrior are hardened through battle. He must take his own body and create what he needs, whether to protect what he wishes or destroy what he hates." His world went dark before he could ask any more inquiries. It appeared to anyone who ventured inside the 3rd headmaster's office that he was working on the paperwork that was strewn all over his desk. But right now he was lost in thought, thinking about the predicament the 2 ships are in. He couldn't really blame the shinobi or the people for being in a panic. He had never felt anything like the core energy that the boy released. According to reports, 24 civilians who were closest to the blast epicenter were apparently forced to their knees due to their own anxiety just to breathe. They were unable to withstand the strain and just passed out. Additionally, 1 elderly man had a slight heart attack after falling to the ground. Fortunately, the man survived, otherwise he would have had to take actions he did not want to take. The main thing on his mind, whether he was Jinchuriki or not, was how a little youngster could have such strong core energy. Then there was Mito, and he was baffled as to how she was still conscious when the ANBU showed up. The boy's core energy caused even him, one of the best ANBU under his leadership, to hesitate. And how the toddler was able to access his core energy was just another question to consider. It was a challenging procedure that often takes up to a month to complete, and in extremely rare circumstances, about 2 weeks. Had someone explained core energy to the youngster and then let him exercise alone? What about Mito? Based on his past experiences, he understood that she should have recovered in less than an hour from the core energy of the 9 beasts. When she had recently injured herself, he had taken her to the hospital with a fractured wrist, but the first physician he saw refused to treat the demon, as he so beautifully described it. He then went to the closest empty room, placed Mito on one of the mattresses, and approached the man in a composed manner. And with a kunai stuck deep between his eyes, he died in a flash quicker than lightning. By that time, there was nothing to suggest that she had ever had a broken wrist in the first place, and if you include the time it took Murdo to transport her to the tower and the doctor's refusal to treat her, it was only around 30 minutes. However, he had to go back to his office to finish his work after waiting for 2 hours in the hospital without seeing any improvement. After all, a hamlet cannot govern itself. Tiger's inner energy suddenly exploded as he emerged from his reverie and shined into the room. The ANBU knelt before the headmaster and stated, "Report on Nerdo and Mito." "Go ahead," the Sandaime stated in the most impartial tone possible. Although he may have strong feelings for the 2 kids, he was unable to express them under the circumstances. "Currently the boy's condition has not changed at all. Doctors have still not been able to successfully use any techniques nor penetrate farther than his skin," he responded. "What about the girl?" inquired the headmaster. "The burn marks that Mito sustained from the unidentified core energy have diminished, although they have not yet entirely disappeared. Mito's condition has stabilized, and it appears that the 9 beasts' core energy has also repaired her shattered arm. Since the discomfort from the wound appears to be too great for her to bear, she must be maintained under continuous sedation." The headmaster questioned, "How is that possible? The incident happened 6 hours ago. She should have been healed hours ago by the 9 beasts' core energy." The ANBU nodded and said, "I also assumed that. But considering how much time has already gone by, I've reached a very disturbing conclusion." "What would that be, then?" The headmaster's eyes narrowed as he asked. Without a shadow of doubt in his stance or voice, the ANBU responded, "That the core energy expelled from the boy is stronger than that of the 9 beasts, as it is the only foreseeable way the beast's core energy could be negated in such a way." "Not possible!" As he rose to his feet, the headmaster yelled, "Nothing in this universe has more power." The elderly leader was radiating a tremendous amount of Ki that was extremely concentrated and sophisticated, and it was all aimed at the ANBU agent. Knowing that an explanation was necessary, Tiger tried his hardest to speak under the stern glare of Headmaster Sama. "Given the corrosive properties of a biju's core energy, the girl's wounds are to be expected, however. Even if only half of the wounds were sealed into the girl, the 9 beasts should have little to no trouble healing them because it is the most powerful of the 9. The 9 beast is said to be incomparably stronger than the other 8, which makes me think that we are dealing with something we do not yet fully understand." Though it was terrible to think about, the headmaster was standing motionless as a stone, doing everything in his power to comprehend what Tiger was saying him. Speaking in a worn and exhausted voice, he said, "I understand what you are trying to say, Tiger, but you are implying that a human child possesses more powerful core energy than the strongest entity humanity has ever come across. After all, not much happens in a single day." The Sandaime said, "I have heard enough theories for today, Tiger. Especially ones like these. Return to the hospital and let me know as soon as you're conscious again. Hopefully, we can figure out what went wrong. Headmaster Sama, hello. Tiger uttered those words before vanishing. Hospital, 7 p.m., same day. When Naruto slowly woke up, he realized two things. First, he felt fantastic. His body had never felt so free and strong before. And second, he was not alone. He opened his eyes slowly to allow them to acclimate to the light, and he saw two people standing by his bed, talking softly. Headmaster Sama, was the gruff whisper he used to try to get the man's attention, and almost immediately they were at his side. The headmaster's old, wrinkled face was wearing a mask with an animal motif that prevented him from seeing the other men. Naruto-kun. He started off slowly so the youngster could get used to it before going on. How are you feeling, my boy? What took place? He didn't know why or how, but he choked out while feeling fantastic since his body was so exhausted. You can't recall? With a look of bewilderment on his face, the headmaster inquired. You used your inner strength, and the outcomes were quite unexpected. Naruto was now perplexed, asking. Core energy? Although he was certain he had heard the term used previously, he was clueless about its meaning. I am afraid I do not know what that is, Headmaster Sama, he said. The expression on the headmaster's face changed from one of relief and confusion to one of neutrality and unreadability. Do not play games with me, boy, he remarked with an angry voice. What has happened because you decided to get a head start or other such nonsense is a very serious matter. Although Naruto was taken aback by the headmaster's tone of voice, he concluded that the only option available to him at the time was to defend himself. Headmaster Sama, I can honestly say I have no idea what happened. What took place? The Sandaime essentially said. The orphanage is nearly half destroyed and reduced to dust. The headmaster was now furious since Tiger's argument made way too much logic, and he sought clarification. He made every effort to calm himself down because he knew that yelling at the youngster would not help. He said, Naruto, you need to listen to me now. I need to know the name of the person who told you about core energy, and how to unlock it. Additionally, you must describe what transpired when you did so. However, he wasn't paying attention because the phrases, orphanage, and rubble, were all he could think of. Where is Mito? He shouted abruptly, startling everyone in the room with how loud his voice was. He asked, hoping to get this out of the way so he could get the information he needed from the youngster, and the headmaster's visage softened a little. She is in the room next to this one. Leaping from the bed and sprinting as fast as he could to the door, he startled the headmaster and the ANBU with his speed. The headmaster reflected in amazement. He was never this fast. The ANBU asked himself in silence. How is a 5-year-old child moving at low Chunin speed? Naruto started to run out the door and into the next room, but he stopped when he saw Mito lying on the bed, not moving. As he approached the bed, he spotted a faint mark on her right arm, and his eyes widened significantly. Was that because of me? He asked himself. She's all right. He heard someone behind him say. Her body is just resting from her recovery. He turned to see the headmaster staring at him closely, though the ANBU made it difficult to tell. Have I done that? Quietly, he inquired. Without sugarcoating the matter, the headmaster nodded. He needed the boy's answers, and if that required removing some emotional barriers, then so be it. You must tell me what transpired, Naruto. Your sister was hurt, and half of the orphanage was destroyed. Could you please tell me what happened? After a few moments to gather his thoughts, Naruto bowed his head slowly and started. Mito and I were both alone in the orphanage. She was reading a book and I was thinking. At this point, he hesitated a little. Thinking about why we are treated differently to the other children who live there. The headmaster winced. But I couldn't figure it out. It's like the answer was right in front of me, but I just couldn't grasp it. I recalled reading about the benefits of meditation for mental clarity. At this point, the headmaster began to piece together what had actually transpired, and it wasn't exactly making him feel any better. He paused to try to put it into words. But when I attempted it, something else drew my attention. You mean like a little ball right behind your navel? The headmaster made an attempt. Nuda gave a nod. Sort of, it actually felt really big as my stomach. He felt out his own core energy, which was only about half the size the boy just described, even considering the difference in their size and mass. But he could not help but believe the boy given the damage done to the orphanage and the state of panic the village was in. The headmaster turned to face the ANBU member, who was staring at the boy with what he assumed was shock behind his mask. That is the energy we call core energy, he clarified. Are you certain that no one ever described core energy and how to access it? He was asked by the headmaster. His response was a simple shake of the head. The ANBU tensed as the youngster abruptly said, It actually felt like there were two different kinds. The headmaster's visage reverted to its previous neutral expression. Explain! He gave an order. Well, I sensed a second one after allowing the first one to roam freely. It was even bigger and it felt more uncontrolled and thicker than the first one did, he said, pausing to find the correct words. Despite his near fear, the headmaster asked, How much larger? Although it was bigger than the previous, it felt different, and I'm not really sure about Headmaster Sama. Comparing the ocean to a lake is analogous. The headmaster took a sharp breath and turned to see Tiger standing as rigid as a board. He had only managed to remain relatively calm through years of dealing with situations and witnessing things that would break any other man. After all, this was the first time he had ever dealt with a situation like this. As a result, his mind was racing, trying to figure out exactly what this child was telling him. You may wait here for your sister to wake up. When she does, I expect both of you in my office immediately, he remarked, a little more forcefully than he had meant to. Come, Tiger, we have much to discuss. After saying nothing more, the two left the room. Underground base, a few hours following the event. A tiny smile appeared on his bandaged face as he strolled through the dim hallways where he spent the majority of his days, his cane cracking against the floor with each step. Today was the day he would finally receive what he had been longing for. After years of waiting, his patience had finally paid off. He arrived at his objective, a big hall with a single throne-like pedestal at the very rear, at the top of a short flight of steps, and a single man fell in front of him as he approached. The man wearing a blank white mask and a tipples tanto in an ANBE uniform said, My lord, your guest has arrived and wishes to speak with you. The man with the cane said, Excellent. Send him in immediately. No further words were exchanged, and the man vanished. He was ecstatic as he settled into his throne. He had been looking forward to this day for so long, and now it had come. In silence, he observed as a man wearing a black uniform with a few red lines thrown in approached him, closely followed by the blank-masked ANBU, whose black and red eyes glowed. The man with the bandage said, I see you have finally arrived. Do you have it? With a small nod, the man with the red eyes revealed to him the sealing scroll he was holding and, with a flourish, opened its contents to reveal a single jar with two eyes that matched the guy's own. I have the eyes as promised. If you fulfill your end of the bargain, you shall receive the rest of them as we have agreed. Not for much longer, the bandaged guy thought, grinning as he looked with his one eye at his prize, but he needed to be sure of one more thing. Are you certain that these are Shursoi's eyes? He inquired. I would know, the other man said, nodding. I removed them myself. The one-eyed man answered, Very well then. I'm not complaining, but I'm curious as to why you approached me. You of all people should have tried this kind of stuff on your own, in my opinion. While I am confident in both my clan and myself, I am not stupid, the other man said with a hint of contempt in his voice. We would undoubtedly be massacred if we faced a whole village. I came to you because I had heard fascinating rumors about your knowledge of such things. Very well, until we meet again, the other man said with a slight smirk. Fugaku. To you as well, Danzo. The mindscape of Mito. Oniai-san, for the past 20 minutes, she had been wandering aimlessly through interconnected hallways that seemed to go on forever with no end in sight. She was wondering how she had entered this place, which looked like a prison with cast iron doors around every corner and along every hallway. However, what really caught her attention were the two pipes lined on each wall. The first was very large and seemed to be leaking a red acidic-like liquid. Every time a drop touched the floor, it hissed and a small cloud of smoke was released into the air, but the ground would almost immediately seal over. For the first 5 minutes she was here, she just watched the process repeatedly. She quickly grew tired of the recurring occurrence and started looking for a way out, and more importantly, for her brother. She ignored the much smaller pipe right beneath the first because it didn't appear to be doing anything unusual. She sagged against one of the walls and slowly went down to a sitting position because she was getting tired of the never-ending wandering and had no idea where Naruto could be. The last thing she remembered was her brother radiating that strong, terrifying energy. She could remember how terrified she was at the time, but that was only a fleeting thought in the back of her mind, telling her to flee while she still had the chance to escape the overwhelming energy her brother was releasing. However, her mind was consumed by her worry for him. If she had felt the way she did, she didn't want to consider what it was like right in the middle of it all. The energy and feelings that had accompanied it were terrifying, and all she had wanted to do was latch on to her brother and beg him to stop. But she was unable to do so at the time because she was rooted to the spot in fear and the natural desire to run. However, the thought of the smile that had crept onto his face really made her tense. It was almost as if he was enjoying it. She was startled out of her reverie when a warm gust of air struck her face, and she got to her feet right away. This was the first sensation of air she had experienced since waking up, and she quickly concluded that it must be a means of escape. Racing towards the source, turning down random hallways and following the warmth the air offered. Despite her uneasy feeling, the air came in precisely timed bursts that didn't seem entirely natural. She smirked as she thought she had discovered a way out, and accelerated as much as she could after turning another corner and seeing a brilliant light at the very end. In front of her, there were enormous bars that stretched higher than her eyesight could see. Each bar appeared to be as thick as a fully grown man, and in the center of it all was a single slip of paper bearing the kanji seal. She came to a grinding stop as a wave of pure evil and terror passed over her. Two crimson eyes slowly opened behind their cage as she stared, utterly mesmerized by the size of such an object. It appears like my container has made the decision to finally show up for me. How long has it been in the outside world, mortal? Tell me. The only thing Mito could do was stand there in awe as she stared into the horrible beast's eyes, motionless and unable to speak as her mind went blank. Talk, mortal! Because you are testing my patience. The beast's voice was furious, and as it spoke, light appeared to pour in from behind it, enabling Mito to see a fox's head and 9 tails flickering behind it. Each tail was bigger and more menacing than the bars that confined it. What are you I am? At the moment, it was all she could say. She was actually shocked when the beast responded to her query because its eyes narrowed as she asked it, nearly expecting it to lunge and rip her to pieces. The one you humans saw fit to call the 9 tails, declared in a loud, booming voice. I am the strongest of the 9 bijou, demonstrating the entity's immense size and power. If this was really the Ninetales, why was it here? Mito's eyes dilated at the implications, and she backed away in terror. Wherever this is. She made the decision to inquire. Why are you here? You were killed 5 years ago by the headmaster of Wyan'dame. The beast said. So it has been 5 years. But to her, it might as well have yelled. There was a gleam in its eye as it returned its focus to Mito. All right, mortal, I'll tell you about that night because I have nothing better to do and no way out of this prison. And maybe we could even reach a consensus of some kind. It was a genuinely horrible and terrifying sight to see as its face contorted into an ugly parody of a smile at this point. Just know this, all is not as it should be. Hospital, departed shortly after. It had only been a few minutes since the headmaster had left him with his sister, and Naruto had been quietly waiting for her to come to, laying his head beside her on the bed and silently apologizing. Immediately behind him, a voice said, I did not think you would be so close to her. He leaped and spun around rapidly to determine the danger the speaker provided to his safety, only to be stopped because the most bizarre figure he had ever seen was standing right in front of him. Wearing a black cloak, he had green hair and what appeared to be a plant growing from each side of his neck, stopping just past the top of his head. What was most odd, though, was that the man's skin was split perfectly in half, with one side being pure white and the other black. He said, My, so jumpy, in 2 quite different tones. What on earth are you? This man could have easily killed him if he so desired. Naruto said in a terrified tone. Me? Well, I guess you could say that I am a close family friend. He grinned. In response, Naruto said sharply, Mito is the only family I have. She didn't tell you? The man asked, seeming perplexed. It doesn't really matter, I guess. Still, I'm curious as to why. Who are you, this time? Naruto asked with a lot more anger and power in his voice. Who, me? Innocently, the plant guy replied. You can just call me Zetsu. What does family friend mean to you? Naruto inquired. You shall find out later, when she deems you ready, said Zetsu. With whom are you speaking? Naruto said, squinting his eyes. Zetsu's face lit up with amusement as she imagined what Naruto's expression would be following his next sentence. Why, the woman who spoke to you after your little episode, of course. He wasn't let down. The shocked expression on his face was priceless. How are you aware of that? Naruto yelled. I haven't mentioned that to anyone. It doesn't matter how I know. If she decided not to tell you, that's not my place, but I am her will come true. And it's you who will make her dreams come true. The stranger flung a scroll at Naruto before he could respond or ask any more questions, then vanished into the earth, leaving no trace of his presence. He looked down at the one word printed on the very front of the scroll. For the majority of the residents of Hyde Ninja Village, it was a quiet day spent simply going about their daily lives, while the market was humming with people buying and selling their wares. That is until a blur rushed through the streets, blowing their stalls' contents, and kicking up dust too quickly for any civilian eye to see, leaving behind loud cries of indignation and rage, along with curses from the store owners whose goods had been broken or damaged by the strong winds. However, the wind subsided and the blur vanished behind a corner farther down the street before anyone had a chance to fully recover from their shock. He could not stop now, not with an armful of stolen produce, and it would not do to give the villagers even more reason to despise the demon. He ran on even after the cries and curses had long since been drowned out by the ferocious winds that roared behind him in his wake. He turned the last corner and bounded up the stairs, taking them in threes, until he arrived at his destination, a small, dilapidated apartment with cracked walls and peeling paint, but that didn't really matter to him. What, or rather, who was waiting for him there was what mattered. He inhaled deeply, drawing on his years of experience, and slowly turned the door handle. A red blur came flying at him as quickly as it could, and Mito had grabbed him again. This was a daily occurrence. No matter how long he had been gone, she was always there to welcome him in this way, and it made him feel happy. Oni-san! Where did you go this time? She exclaimed with joy. What took you so long? Have you received the meal? Have you been noticed by anyone? She was a little short of breath because the questions were yelled so fast and urgently. Calm down, Mito, he whispered gently. I had to go further into the market today than I usually do. The Sandames had ninja patrolling the areas I usually visit. Do not worry though, nobody saw me. Her expression shifted from one of relief and joy to one of despair and hope as she gazed at him. He answered the question before she had a chance to ask the one he knew she would. With the smallest of smirks, he replied, Do not worry, Mito. I have the ramen. She instantly became radiant and gave him a smile that could light up the entire hamlet. Oni-san arigato! Come, Mito, we have much to do today. You can eat when we are finished, he said quietly. Her face drooped a little, then she straightened up and smiled a little again. Hey, I take it Gigi wanted to see us? Happily, she said. As he considered his relationship with the headmaster, a slight frown formed on his face. It had been difficult for the past 3 years, ever since the incident with his core energy, which is also why they now live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. The orphanage would not let them return, so they are both stuck in this dump. He spoke carefully, trying not to show his feelings. Hi, I believe Headmaster Sama wishes to speak with us about our entrance into the academy. Excitement and surprise instantly filled her gaze. Gosh! I'm going to be the greatest ninja ever, she exclaimed with joy. After that, I'm going to become Databayo's greatest headmaster ever. He concealed his own pleasure at the prospect of improving his own abilities by grinning slightly at her enthusiasm. The idea crossed his mind. I know you will, Mito. Office of the Headmaster. With a slight chuckle, the Sandame glanced at the stack on the corner of his desk that had been marked as complete. He was sitting in his office, savoring the joys of tobacco. It was a slow day at work, so there wasn't much paperwork. As he considered the guests he was expecting, a frown gradually appeared on his face. They would not be pleased with the information he had for them. He was distracted from those thoughts by a tap on the door, but the core energy was still there. Speak of the devil, he said, clearing his throat. Come on in, he gave an order. The door opened to reveal Naruto and Mito. Mito was short for her age, with blood-red hair that reached her lower back and violet eyes that sparkled. She wore a dark orange jacket and baggy black pants that ended at her ankles, with dark blue sandals on her feet. Her face had 3 distinct whisker-like marks, and she wore a red shirt that was a few shades darker than her hair. But Naruto, who preferred darker or neutral hues, wore a black shirt that showcased his impressive muscle for an 8-year-old, a pair of dark gray pants that hung down to his ankles, and a very dark red jacket that was nearly black in color. His hair was also grown out, with 2 black bangs framing his face and nearly reaching his chin, while the rest was a pure white that looked like freshly fallen snow, grown out to just below the boy's shoulder blades. The headmaster had always been slightly amazed by the contrast of the 2 colors. However, this was not the moment. Both of them made a modest bow, although Naruto made Mito do it because she was too eager to recall the etiquette. He said, Mito and I are here at your request, Headmaster Sama. What would you like to discuss with us? The headmaster interlocked his fingers right in front of his mouth to conceal the frown that threatened to show on his face. It's the only thing I can do, he thought to himself. But he's already so far away, this will just make him even farther away. Yes, Naruto-kun, as you are both aware, the academy begins on Monday of next week. However, I regret to inform you of some fairly distressing news. Although Naruto appeared to have a completely indifferent countenance, the headmaster did not miss the nearly imperceptible narrowing of the lad's eyes as Mito gazed at him with bewilderment written on her face. It was hardly a question. We will not be allowed entrance. Unfortunately, Naruto-kun, it is only you who has been barred from the academy. After your incident 3 years ago, the council has seen it prudent to keep their children out of harm's way in the case something like that had to happen again. What? Mito yelled, utterly furious at the elderly man's remarks. Naruto-kun, Gigi cannot be subjected to this. It's simply unfair. What am I? Before she could finish speaking, Naruto interrupted her. His voice was filled with rage, which he chose not to display on his face. When Mito was reprimanded by her brother, she retreated within herself in a way that the headmaster had never witnessed. He pushed those thoughts aside as he looked back at the white-haired child. I do not understand the reasons behind this decision. How is it that Mito will be allowed attendance while I am cast aside? To the best of my knowledge, High Ninja Village is a dictatorship, with the headmaster having the final say in all military-related issues, he said as calmly as he could. As he prepared himself for the explanation, the headmaster suppressed a long sigh. Naruto-kun began slowly. The problem lies in the fact that this is not a military-related matter, not entirely anyway. While the academy does prepare children for the life of shinobi, it is in the end a school full of children, both from shinobi as well as civilian backgrounds. The civilians are given around 50% power in civilian-related matters, with the headmaster holding the other 50% to preserve the balance. But you are correct in the fact that I control every aspect of the military in this village. The clans may only be called to vote if something is deemed a threat to village safety, or our way of life. He saw that Naruto was going to cut him off in the middle of his explanation, so he just lifted his hand to stop the youngster and went on. And while usually it would be possible for the headmaster to usurp any decision made by them, the fact is this problem has never arisen before, and you are only considered a shinobi and part of the military system when you wear the village's headband. Therefore both civilian and shinobi voted on this matter. In the end it was decided you would not be allowed to attend. As the child took in the information, he could see the barely concealed wrath behind his eyes. This still does not explain why I am the only one who will not be allowed to attend, Headmaster Sama. Third headmaster nearly flinched as he pronounced those things with such disgust. Nearly. He thought to himself. You are too smart for your own good, Naruto. Before he began, he cleared his throat. The council is not allowed to vote on any matters besides the ones that could be considered a threat to the village. They used this loophole to bar your entrance. And in the case of Mito, she has never done something that could be deemed as such. They therefore did not have the power to stop her from attending. With tears in her eyes and a desperate tone, Mito said, Gigi, please, you can't do this to Oniai-san. He never meant to do that to the orphanage. What am I supposed to do without him there to help me? The headmaster had given the proceedings his full attention. For Naruto, there was just one option, and he didn't want to put the child through it. The child gazed with the chilliest expression he had ever seen in his shinobi days, and something was blazing behind his eyes. It was the expression of a guy whose dreams had been torn from him and flung in his face. With utter disdain in his voice, he added, If that will be all, Headmaster Sama. His decision seemed to have been predetermined. He turned to face Mito. Mito-chan, please wait outside my office, he stated with a calm tone. There is something I wish to speak to Naruto about. If he agrees, he may tell you. She started out slowly, her eyes threatening to well up with tears, but she quickly rushed to her brother's side and gave him a passionate hug. She finally broke down in tears as she murmured, "I'm so sorry, Oni-san." Knowing that her brother's one and only hope had been virtually dashed, she fled the office as fast as she could. His eyes gleamed with rage as he turned to face the headmaster. The rage that was pulsing through his body nearly drove him to assault the man, but he was reasonable enough to know that nothing would come of it other than a freezing cell and 2 cold meals a day. He started to say something, but the sandaime interrupted him. "I know what you are going to say, you do not need to. I know I have failed you once again, Naruto. I am truly sorry for that. But as I have said, in this particular situation I had no control over what has happened." "No control?" he practically growled at the sandaime. "You're the headmaster. You should have complete control of all the inner workings of the village. What am I?" Naruto was the headmaster's most solemn ever utterance toward him. These regulations were put in place by the Shodaime and Nidaime headmasters, both of which were my senseis. I hold all their teachings in high regard. These were the 2 that set the entire system for our village, and while there are some flaws in this system, that has kept us a cut above the rest. He groaned as he observed the boy. His stance and body betrayed no signs of animosity, but his eyes blazed with a hatred and anger he had never witnessed in a child. He would have to give him the option, it would appear. Abruptly, he questioned, "What would you do to become a shinobi, Naruto?" He responded without hesitation. "Anything." He inquired, "And what would you give up?" "Everything." The question that would decide whether or not he would spread the rumor was, "Even Mito?" It had the intended effect of throwing the child off balance. As he recovered from his shock, a look of great turmoil took over his face. He arrived at a conclusion in just under 5 seconds. "No." The headmaster sighed inwardly with relief and gave the boy a tiny grin. The child seemed to have had the proper priorities. "Very well then, how would you like to join the ANBU, Naruto?" When he saw what the headmaster was doing, he trailed off. "What? I thought that I—" As he bowed, a tiny smile appeared on his face. With genuine appreciation in his voice, he added, "It would be my honor, Headmaster-sama." "Very well then, Naruto. Next week when Mito begins the academy, come to my office. I will see to it you are a registered ANBU by the end of the day," spoke to the sandaime with a gentle tone. "Thank you for this opportunity, Headmaster-sama. I shall do my utmost," Naruto replied. With a hint of arrogance, he said, "Ah yes, about that, Naruto-kun. Would you care to explain your late-night excursions into the forest? Surely you did not think you could hide such a thing from me." Naruto found himself unable to answer for the first time in his memory. The question was raised by the fact that he had made sure no one had followed him. How could the headmaster have known? Enjoying the expression on the boy's face, he said, "No need to be so tense, Naruto-kun. I have seen you train yourself into the ground. But the question still stands, why did you not come to me when you discovered this ability of yours?" It was almost impossible to surprise the boy, much less make him so agitated, so he took great pleasure in the few occasions when he managed to elicit such a reaction. "Headmaster-sama," began slowly, unsure of what to say. "With all due respect, if anyone were to come to know of my bloodline, I would not only lose the element of surprise, but I would have multiple people out for my head. I have done extensive research on both the bloodline and the clan it once belonged to, and from what I could gather, they were not very well liked. Furthermore, it could call into question my loyalty to the village as a whole. Many people would claim that I am not a born and bred Hyde Ninja village citizen, and even though I was raised here my whole life, many would accuse me of being a spy. It would have simply caused far too many inconveniences had it become public knowledge," he said, taking a deep breath following the explanation because he was unaccustomed to speaking so much at once. The Sandaime pondered the child's response while reclined in his chair and refilled his pipe. Even if it made sense to the lads, the headmaster could not overlook issues like these since they were too significant to the village to be kept a secret. That may be Naruto-kun, but keeping such delicate information from the headmaster is tantamount to treason. The only reason I cannot and will not punish you for this is the simple fact that I am as of yet not your commanding officer. I do, however, urge you in future not to keep this sort of thing quiet. Understood? He began gently, but toward the end, he spoke with the strength and authority of the village chief. With an entirely neutral tone, Naruto said, I will be sure to keep your words under consideration, Headmaster Sama. Was not quite satisfied, especially with the boy's ambiguous response. Nevertheless, he dismissed it with a sweep of his hand. With Mito. There were no other words or phrases that could adequately express her current state of inner turmoil. She was depressed. On the one hand, her brother's one and only dream had been dashed, and she couldn't imagine spending hours every day without him. On the other hand, her brother was not going to be a ninja. She thought they would be the greatest ninjas ever, so she decided to be a ninja with her brother. Her head suddenly jerked up, and the weeping ceased. She exclaimed, That's an amazing idea! And got to her feet. What is? She saw her brother as she whirled around with her scream trapped in her throat. Her expression brightened and her shock vanished as she gave him the strongest bear embrace she could muster. Oni-san! I have the best idea! I'll teach you what I learn from the academy every day when I get home. You'll learn what I learn! Then when I'm headmaster, I'll make you a jounin! For the first several seconds following her pronouncement, he looked at her in mild amazement, watching as her self-satisfied smile grew wider and wider. Why is she so concerned? He questioned himself. She pushed Oni-san down. He abruptly stopped being surprised and met Mito's gaze. His expression was lifeless and expressionless, but she had long since learned to read him by his eyes. His happiness was genuine. He began cautiously putting his arms around her and whispered to her in a quiet, emotional manner. Thank you so much. After a week. When they got home, Mito was obviously happy, but a little disappointed that she wouldn't be able to see her brother as much as she would have liked. She was humming a happy song and skipping along the ground as she made her way to the academy. Her brother had explained what was going on and how he was to join the ANBU. He had responded that it was a division of competent ninja under direct control of the headmaster, therefore he had the last word in all matters pertaining to them when she questioned how it was possible to join the ANBU but not the academy. She was a little perplexed as she reflected on the day since she believed her brother's embrace was a result of her offering to coach him, but it turns out that was not the case. Even though it didn't really matter anymore, she had vowed to herself to find out why he had given her such a hug because it had made her feel so pleased. The bell rung, interrupting her thoughts. Oh no! I'm going to be late on my first day. She hurried off to locate Class 302A right away, and she did it 10 minutes later. Using Naruto. The Sandaime kept a close eye on the youngster as he bowed and greeted him. He was still unsure if this was the right thing to do, but he reminded himself that it was the only option. With a tiny smile on his face, he added, Naruto-kun, it's good to see you, my boy. Knowing he would discover his plan, he cast a quick glance at the tiger standing just to his right. He came forward and cleared his throat. Naruto, it has come to my attention that the headmaster wishes to enroll you as a trainee in the ANBU, and as such you will become my responsibility to train. Know that this is the highest honor a shinobi can receive, and if it were not for your previous self-imposed training you would not even be considered for such prestige. The boy acknowledged with a bow. Very well, Tiger replied. There is still one more thing for us to discuss. The boy raised an eyebrow slightly and said, And that would be? This training will be unlike any you can imagine. You will be pushed beyond your breaking point. Your stamina will mean all but nothing. There will be no breaks, no mercy, and certainly no pity from any of us. Your core energy will be next to non-existent at the end of each day. Your bones will snap and you will have to carry on. Question being, are you ready for this? Tiger said in a deep voice.